So we are reading Robert Monroe's The Far Journeys. We are on the appendices, page number 271 of the book and 141 of the PDF.
The QBE Psychophysiology of Robert A. Monroe by Stuart W. Twemlow, MD, and Glenn O. Gabbard, MD. Robert Monroe is a businessman from Virginia, now in his 60s, who is one of the most widely gifted subjects in the OBE literature. He has written a book cataloging his out-of-body exploits and has founded a private institution devoted to the study of such phenomena, the Monroe Institute of Applied Sciences in Faber, Virginia. He voluntarily submitted himself to in-depth psychiatric and psychological evaluation several years prior to the publication of this book. He underwent intensive psychiatric interviewing and a battery of different psychological tests. Monroe has never had psychiatric treatment of any form. He has performed at a high level of functioning throughout his career as producer, businessman, and entrepreneur.
So in the beginning, when the research started, the Monroe Institute was called the Monroe Institute of Applied Sciences. Later on, the name was converted into the Monroe Institute. Now I think they are removing the also and they're making it Monroe Institute. So names keep changing for that matter. So also in the beginning, when he started having these OBs, it's there in his first book. He started having the OB and then he was thinking he's going crazy. So he had a lot of psychiatric analysis and psychologists who really examined him. And all of them gave him a clean bill of health, that he was absolutely sane and there was nothing wrong with him.
As we delve into his background, we find that he did not have out-of-body experiences until the age of 42. He had an orthodox Southern upbringing with high-achieving and successful parents. From an early age, Monroe had a fascination with flying. He built model planes as a little boy and learned to fly airplanes when he was only in high school. Later, he became an accomplished glider pilot. He was also preoccupied with the thrill of movement and has wonderful memories of riding on trains. Tolkien 1974 has related such intense developmental vicissitude to the grandiose fantasy which she calls the Daedalus experience. She takes this name, of course, from the myth of Daedalus and Icarus, who longed to fly over the sea and created wax wings for themselves to accomplish this task. Icarus, the son of Daedalus, became intoxicated with his ability to fly and flew too near the sun. The sun melted the wax on his wings and he plunged into the sea as his father, Daedalus, continued on his way. Tolkien postulates that this myth and the fascination with flying is intimately connected with a certain developmental period when the infant experiences an ecstatic primal pleasure at being flung about by his mother and father and doting relatives. This archaic, grandiose fantasy of defying gravity and flying through the air is normally tamed in the process of maturity and channeled into high achievement and other kinds of sublimatory activities. Tolstoy, for example, leapt out of a window at the age of 9 in an attempt to fly and suffered a concussion. However, he almost never relinquished the literal belief that he could fly. He had ecstatic notions about merging with the moon, which Tolkien relates to the fantasy of mystical merger with his mother, whom he lost at the age of 2. This early grandiose notion was, of course, channeled into extraordinary mastery and creativity in the area of writing. Winston Churchill had a similar background and at 18 jumped off a bridge onto treetops. This early grandiosity was gradually transformed from the realm of action into the realm of thought, as in his stirring speeches, example, We Shall Never Surrender. Tolkien provides another example of a 6-year-old child who leapt off a merry-go-round in an effort to fly and became furious with his mother because he could not. This wish to fly was later transformed into a wish to fly an airplane.
So many of us many of us have this this desire to fly, to defy gravity. It's there in all of us. I think that children have a great time being thrown up and down, when they feel that defiance of the gravity. So all of us had it, and Robert Monroe also had it. And he had it to such an extent that he became an accomplished flyer, and he used to fly gliders on a regular basis, right? In his first book, in Journeys Out of the Body, when he was having his first experiences, he had actually gone to sleep, and he was actually relaxing and thinking of the good winds which were coming, which would result in a very nice flight. And he was looking forward to flying the next day when he had this first out of body experience that he had. Okay, so the idea of flying can also help in generating an out of body experience.
The fascination with outer body travel seen in Monroe is likely an adult derivative of this Daedalus fantasy. His childhood grandiose wish is transformed not only into outer body experiences as an adult, but also into the creation of an institute devoted to the study of these and other esoteric experiences. Hence, in Monroe, we see perhaps a more direct translation of the childhood wish to fly into an adult form of the grandiose wish. However, he has used this interest adaptively and productively rather than in a self destructive or counterproductive way. It may be that this persistent grandiose wish to fly is more likely to be operative as a determinant in those subjects who have the esoteric variety of out of body experience, that is, travels to distant locations and through other realms which are fantastic and inexplicable. This determinant may not apply to those mundane experiences where one simply finds himself floating on the ceiling above his body.
Can
If
you?
one of the If one of the determinants of Monroe's outer body experience is this persistent wish to escape the shackles of the earthbound physical form, what are some of the others? His history indicates that he was free from childhood trauma and, in fact, somewhat indulged with creature comforts. His mother, a dynamic and successful physician, had a certain outlook on life which tended to avoid ugliness and unpleasantness. This attribute also emerges in an analysis of Monroe's personality. Both Monroe and his mother used the defenses of denial and avoidance to a significant extent. These hypomaniac defenses against aggression, tragedy, and destructiveness were further demonstrated in projective psychological testing. The Rorschach tests indicated that Monroe was a man who avoids many aspects of his internal life. He has strong defenses against dealing with sexuality, defensive feelings, and especially aggression, all areas of his psyche that he prefers to keep out of his awareness. He has a pervasive tendency to avoid and detach himself from feelings which show itself in his patterns of thinking, his use of language, and his interpersonal relations. He often simply steers off away and tangential to the way others think, feel, perceive, and express themselves. These personality inclinations contribute to the content of what he saw on a particular ink blot, which is often seen as a bat or a bird. Monroe saw this as a flying unit with wings in the shape of a bird or the body of a butterfly or insect flying upwards towards the top of the card. Thus, the outer body experience in Monroe also serves the function of avoidance of conflict. By transcending the prison of his body, it allows him to steer clear of such potential conflict areas as sexuality, depression, and aggression.
So it says very clearly over here that he was a person who wanted to be with himself. He did not want conflict and the aspect of sexuality and aggression in his life. So one of the ways that he could escape was by going out of the body. So a detachment was there. Okay. The other thing is that when you do these tests, where these ink block tests, they show you various pictures, and what they're all abstract pictures. Now they ask you, what do you see in those pictures? Based on that, they can develop what kind of a personality you have. So what's he saying over here? In most of the ink blots, he always saw something which was flying and flying out of the body. So basically, he was in that state of consciousness all the time. Okay, so it also says over here, so one of the determinants of Monroe's out-of-body experience is this persistent wish to escape the shackles of earthbound physical form. So he wanted to escape from the things that he may have been experiencing, or which the potential conflict areas of sexuality, depression, and aggression. So one of the ways in which is to get out of the body. So this may have actually triggered his desire to get out of the body. And of course, he was flying and all that other stuff is also there.
Observations of Robert Monroe were made by one of us, SWT, and a colleague, Dr. Fowler Jones of the University of Kansas Medical Center, over a 30-minute time period when Monroe was monitored by a Beckham polygraph with left and right occipital EEG electrodes. He was observed by us through a one-way window, Twemlow, 1977. Most striking was Monroe's spasmodic breathing with periods of apnea. After these apneic periods, the breaths were gulping. Simultaneously, Dr. Jones and SWT turned to each other and reported the impression of a heat wave-like distortion beginning at Monroe's waist, so that it was difficult to get a clearly focused picture of his upper body, although his lower body was in clear focus. Previously, Monroe had stated that he would be able to get out of his body quickly but could not signal it, although he could signal within 5 seconds of return. This distortion disappeared rather suddenly, a little before he roused himself. At that time, his EEG showed a shift in his high amplitude patterns to the right hemisphere with a low amplitude in the left occipital lead.
So basically what happened when he was going out of the body, he's going into the right side of the brain. Now, having said that, when people have OEBs, what we have seen in the mind mirror at least is both sides flatline, and the electrical activity in the brain really compresses. It really gets compressed, right? But over here, he says over here, a wave-like distortion beginning at Monroe's waist. So it was difficult to see and clearly focus on his upper body. So that means that at that time, he was actually shifting out of the body.
He seemed to wake without anxiety, although he was moderately disoriented in space for about 30 seconds. With slight slurring of his speech, he could not recapture his experience immediately. His GSR level during the session showed an increase in arousal of approximately 150 microvolts, marked by the total absence of either specific or non-specific responses during his out-of-body phase. At one point, when a technician entered the room to check electrodes, Monroe appeared to be unaware of his presence and there was no fluctuation in GSR. The skin of his arm and forearm were dry and warm to the touch. At that time, rapid fluttering eye movements were noted, although eye movements were not measured.
So what is GSR? It is galvanized skin response. This is basically what the electrical potential of the skin is. Okay. Now over here, when he was in his normal state, it had 100 microvolts. When he went out of his body, the electrical activity in the body, it diminished. And even if someone came into the room, which would create a little bit of arousal and increase in electrical activity, it did not take place. So what this implies was that he was actually out of the body at the time that the technician came into the room to test whether the electrode was installed properly or not.
Sections of Monroe's EEG during this reported out-of-body experience were analyzed for frequency differences both within and between hemispheres. An analysis of variance was run with the data divided into beginning, middle, and end sections, each section having 29 values for a total of 290 seconds. Two groups were analyzed, right and left hemispheres. There seemed to be no significant frequency differences between hemispheres, although the amplitude differences were obvious. There were significant differences between the beginning and middle and the beginning and end sections of Monroe's EEG in each hemisphere. This latter difference showed that before and after OBE frequencies were much higher than the during OBE frequencies. Standard deviations were also significantly smaller with the middle section as compared to the beginning and end sections. A powerful spectral analysis of OBE periods showed power peaks at 4 to 5 Hz with very little activity above 10 Hz.
So power peaks at 4 to 5 hertz. Okay. Now 4 to 5 hertz is between the delta and the theta level of brainwave frequencies. So he is going into a very deep meditative state kind of situation, because this is literally in the theta range when he is having his OBE activity.
What are we to conclude from this experiment? Although the observational findings were more provocative than the EEG findings, they are less easily explained. Clearly, Monroe was in a deep state of relaxation. In addition, when in his out-of-body state,
Why did they kill the mother?
In addition,
when in his out-of-body state, there is a frequency showing with an interesting shift in power to a 4 to 5 Hz range in the theta delta transitional zone. This electrophysiological borderline state correlates closely with Tart's findings and Harari's reference to borderline sleep wakefulness states.
so what is the theta state, right? The theta and the delta state right in the middle. Now, in the beginning, when they started doing experiments with the explorers also, it was very easy to relax them using the frequencies, but many times they just fell off to sleep. Now, when they fell off to sleep, it was difficult to get any kind of response from them, right? So they could not be any analysis, any kind of discussion, any kind of activity responding back. And that is what happened when they found binaural beats and they started using binaural beats. It was possible to hold a person in that state of consciousness at 4 to 5 hertz, where they were not going into sleep and they were not fully conscious also. And that is when the magic started to happen. So Robert Monroe was able to go into that state of consciousness without any kind of external support when he was having his out of body experiences. You can move to introduction, Shivanga.
Okay. In his 1979 presidential address to the American Psychiatric Association, Dr. Jules Massaman noted that one of man's three ultimate seekings is a system of values and mystic beliefs to provide metapsychological serenity. He noted that there was a growing interest in what he called metapsychiatry, reflecting a parallel preoccupation in the general public with esoteric faiths and transcendental seekings for the ultimate. There is scant recognition of such areas in the traditional psychiatric literature, although periodic case reports appear, for example, a case study of self induced depersonalization by Kennedy. It is true that increasing number of patients were involved in movements such as transcendental meditation report experiences traditionally classified as psychopathological. These movements emphasize that some of these symptom complexes should not be treated in the way that a symptom is usually treated, that is, interpretation medication, but that many of these phenomena should be viewed by the unfamiliar treating physician with benign neglect and referred back to the meditation teacher for management. This is because a number of them are usual and expected accompaniments of change in cognition, perception, and affect modulation that are expected to occur and are desirable.
So what happens is that when we are going into these altered states of consciousness, a lot of changes in the way that we are perceiving things and the way that we are dealing with things start taking place. Right now, many times these experiences which people are having are treated by doctors and psychiatrists, etc., as hallucinations because they have no understanding of the process. So there is one book, Spiritual Emergencies by Lee someone. He indicates all these things. So people having Kundalini experiences, people having out of body experiences, people having lucid dreams are at times treated with medication, which actually should not be done. It should be handed back to the meditation person or a person who has understanding of going into these altered states of consciousness. Now, this was the beauty of our Gurukul system also, where the Guru actually had these experiences. So it was very easy, or it was prudent for the Guru to guide the students in these experiences. Now, most of the doctors don't have these experiences, so they have no other way of doing anything, but they'll give you medication which will stun the mind and not allow the mind to go into those deep states of consciousness or deep states of meditation or go into altered states of consciousness. They'll just stun the mind. So you can't think anymore.
Our two papers summarize a study of one such phenomenon, the outer body experience OBE. The goal of our study is to address the following questions. What is the continuum of phenomenological features, which is the out of body state? How does it compare with certain other states of consciousness, such as dreaming, life threatening experience, sensory deprivation states, and mystical religious experience? 3. How does it relate to pathological states, for example, depersonalization, autoscopy, and psychosis? 4. What are the short and long term effects on the individual, and what does the experience mean to him? 5. What, if any, are the implications of this phenomena for the practice of psychiatry?
So there are a lot of shifts and changes which take place. And so this was a report on the study of what changes took place.
Definition of the term out of body experience. For the purposes of our survey, we chose to define the experience in a very general way, since review of the literature clearly revealed that there is little, if any, agreement about what characterizes the state phenomenologically physiologically in terms of personality structure or in terms of significance to the individual. We chose the following definition: an experience where you felt that your mind or awareness was separated from your physical body. As with Palmer, we felt that the only theme in the literature which distinguishes these experiences is a sense of location of the total sense of self at some other place other than in the physical body. We did not feel that it was wise to restrict our definition further at this point until the experience had been more thoroughly studied. Such a definition, however, does not reflect certain biases on our behalf. Explicitly, there are: 1. A belief that with the current state of knowledge, the subject is in a better position than the investigator to decide whether or not he had an out of body experience. 2. We wanted to emphasize the sense of location of self awareness rather than the complex and extremely variable visual and auditory experiences reported in the anecdotal literature. 3. Whether or not there is an objective laboratory demonstration of a separation of self awareness from its normal location in the brain seems not relevant to the study of the phenomenon from a psychiatric point of view. Although some take Although some take the position, for example, OSIS, that such a criterion should be fundamental to the experience, we feel it peripheral to an understanding of its psychological impact and its meaning to the individual, particularly in terms of his value structure and the organization and functioning of his ego. For now, we feel that the experience should be subjectively defined. However, we are very aware of the vast literature on perceptual illusion, suggesting that such research is enormously subject to bias. For example, Ornay demonstrated that experimental results are directly affected by the experimenter's personal belief system.
So the last line demonstrated that experimental results are directly affected by the experimenter's belief system. So what a researcher is going to find is what the researcher is looking for. So that's why all these phenomenon, right, out of body experiences, all these mystical experiences become very difficult to examine and dissect in a laboratory environment, simply because the bias of the researcher is going to affect the finding. Also, what is the experience of the experiencer is more important than what the experimenter is getting, because many times the experimenter will have no barometer by which to actually understand what is the experience the experiencer is having. Simple case in this is that today, if a person has experienced the excursion workshop, if you want to describe your experience to another person, it becomes extremely difficult. Let me tell you, 99% of excursion participants will tell their people that you have to experience it to understand it. There is no other way to understand it. So now, if there is no other way to understand it, if an experimenter is attempting to understand it without doing the experience himself or herself, it becomes very, very problematic.
Attempts such as those of Tart and Temlow to obtain psychophysiological correlates of such an experience cannot be said to characterize it even partially, adequately, not unlike, for example, trying to describe a whole person using only an EKG. Reported laboratory studies show no stable features but are suggestive. In our own studies of the gifted subject Robert Monroe, and in a time series study of 11 S's conducted to examine his OBE facilitating technique, one naive subject did show some unusual EEG changes, an occipital EEG pattern more similar to an occipital slow wave of sleep variant. Tart notes, as we do, that EEG measures in general show a dramatic reduction in neuronal energy in the alpha and theta band, with some unusual patterns not characteristic of REM sleep or other normal sleep stages.
So the EEG pattern of an OOBE is very different from any of the other patterns, including the sleep pattern or the REM sleep pattern. REM stands for rapid eye movement. So when we are just coming out or there's a cognitive function taking place and there's a clearing of the brain in hypnosis, they say there's a rapid eye movement. Okay. These states are very important in the whole sleep pattern. So you have you're awake, then you have got REM sleep, you've got light sleep, and then you've got deep sleep. So it's in that transition period when the REM sleep comes in the middle, where your eye actually starts to move around, but you're literally sleeping, but the eye is moving inside automatically.
The term outer body experience was coined by Tart in 1960 primarily to avoid the judgmental alternative names present in the literature, which implied some non existent exact knowledge of etiology of the experience. For example, such terms as astral projection, ESP projection, doubling, astral travel, etc. Some writers feel that out of body experience is a specific form of depersonalization, a point to be addressed in the third paper of this series. Others, such as Edwald, emphasize not only the sense of separation but also the visual accompaniments of what is seen by the self located outside the body.
So astral travel, astral projection, these words were there. But when Charles starts, so now Charles Start's story is that Robert Monroe he started having these experiences in 1958. And he started actually journaling all his activities and he made a big journal. Now he was going for, and the story goes that he was going for an operation and he wanted his notes to be kept safe. So he actually gave it to Tart, Charles Tart, to keep it safe, right? And told him that when I come back, you give it back to me, because he had a feeling that he may not come back. So he wanted to give it to someone responsible. Now, what Tart did was that he actually read those notes, and he was a very highly published kind of a gentleman, Tart. So he gave that all those notes to his publisher. And when Robert Monroe came back from his operation and his recovery, and he asked for his journal back, he said it has gone and it has now become a book. So that's how the book actually came about, Robert Monroe's book. So Tart was actually responsible. After he read Robert Monroe's experiences, he coined the term out of body experience, but he took it from Robert Monroe's writings.
Following Tart's generally widely accepted definition of an altered state of consciousness as a qualitative alteration in overall pattern of mental functioning, such that the experiencer feels his consciousness is radically different from the way it functions ordinarily. An adequate definition of OBE might include the following points: an altered state of consciousness in which the subject feels that his mind or self awareness is separated from his physical body, and this self awareness has a vivid and real sense about it, quite different from a dream.
So this is a definition of the out of body experience, where you are in an altered state of consciousness. You have a feeling that you are separate from your physical body, and you have total self awareness. In fact, all the sensory perceptions are heightened.
To flesh out this rather abstract definition, a letter was selected from one of approximately 700 describing such experiences received by one of the authors, SWT. This report is an example without many of the dramatic trappings of those reported in the parapsychological and theosophical literature, and is given by a 52-year-old retired government employee living in Puerto Rico. He says, when I was approximately 10 years old, I was living together with my older brother at my uncle's house, a major in the US Army Medical Corps. One day, I was reclined on my bed quite awake and was looking at the ceiling beams of the old Spanish building where the living quarters were located. I was saying to myself many questions such as what was I doing there and who was I? All of a sudden, I get up from the bed and start walking towards the next room. At that moment, I felt a strange sensation in me. It was a sensation of weightlessness and a strange mix of a sense of feeling of joy. I turned back in my steps in order to go back to bed, when, to my big surprise, I saw myself reclined on the bed. This surprising experience at the very small age gave me the kind of a jerk which, so to say, shook me back to my body. This example particularly well exemplifies the ordinary, even mundane, content of the experience, its vivid emotional impact, the sense of a complete functioning, self located outside the brain, and the considerable surprise when the physical body is seen, and the way this anxiety triggers the delicate balance of the alteration of consciousness, causing a restitution of the normal cognitive set of in body state.
So it's like another body which is outside the physical body. But again, in OBs, if you think of your physical body, boom, you will be back in your physical body. Because this is the Aadhaar, this is the base, this is where you're operating from actually. You're getting out of this body. So that's why in William Bullman's meditations and the way that he talks about it, he says the last thing you need to remember if or think about is your physical body if you're wanting to have an out of body experience.
Taxonomy of OBEs. As might be expected, all possible classification approaches have been applied to such experiences, and each generally begs the question because there is no agreement as to what constitutes the OBE. Four possible approaches suggest themselves. A classification by natural clustering of phenomena, that is, subjective reports, the approach addressed in this paper. Classification by precipitating agents or stressors, that is, the conditions existing at the time of the experience, although a cause-effect relationship has never been established, discussed in this paper. Next, classification by psychosocial and psychopathological variables, suggested only anecdotally and being addressed in the second paper in this series. For example, Eastman reports OBEs associated with fearful states of mind, states of loneliness, and states of extremely positive mood, ecstatic states. Classification by analogy. Here is suggested a state of sensory deprivation, peak and plateau experiences, and psychopathological states, schizophrenic body boundary loss, autoscopy, depersonalization, etc., being addressed in our third paper.
So there are various classifications because no one can actually come up with a perfect definition because everyone's experience is a little different from everyone else's experience.
A correct taxonomy may make use of all four approaches in an attempt to define pathognomic features of the experience. Naturally, the ultimate value of a taxonomy would depend on what it can explain. Many features of OBEs are most likely explainable by the idiosyncratic effects of precipitants, for example, drugs, personality and defensive constellations, and cultural factors, including belief systems.
Go ahead.
Surveys of OBE. Few surveys of the incidence of OBEs exist. The earliest was by Hart in 1954. He asked 155 students whether they had ever had an OBE. 27.17% of them said that they had, most of them having had more than one experience. This result is not inconsistent with the results of several later surveys. In 1968, Green reports the results of asking 380 Oxford undergraduates, have you ever had an experience in which you felt that you were out of your body? Of these, 34% replied affirmatively. Palmer and Dennis in 1975 published the first survey using a randomly selected group of 1,000 students and townspeople in a small town in Virginia. 25% of the students and 14% of the townspeople reported having had an OBE. A rather original approach to the study of OBEs was that of Shields, who collected data on belief in OBEs from nearly 70 non Western cultures. Despite cultural differences, the beliefs were strikingly similar. Shields felt that this was indirect evidence for an account of a genuine event, the OBE. It is quite well known, for example, that many cultures attribute to shamans the capacity to fly out of the body. In fact, a shaman cannot be anointed as such unless he has that capacity. According to Iliad, such flights express intelligent understanding of secret things, metaphysical truths, symbolic meaning, transcendence, and freedom. A South African study analyzing 122 accounts in response to a press request found that the OBE occurred often while the subject was asleep, relaxed, or dozing, and that over 50% of the subjects claimed to have been in a normal mental state when the phenomenon occurred.
So, what is the definition of a shaman? The definition of the shaman is a person who can go into altered states of consciousness, get information for the benefit of the tribe, and he can perform miracles. Perform miracles means he can do healing, because at that time a miracle was due to healing only. Plus, get information for the tribe means that where do we find shelter? Where can we find food to eat? Where can we find water? Where will we not be attacked by predators? So the shaman used to guide the entire tribe, right? So over here, OBE is the shamans constantly go into an altered state of consciousness to get back this information for the benefit of the tribe. So this is something which is not new. It has been happening over and over the years. Our Rishi Munis were always doing it. Okay. And also, you need to be, generally speaking, in a relaxed state to have an OBE. But again, when you are in a very, very stressful situation, also then a separation can take place suddenly when you want to disassociate from whatever is happening. I think let's skip the rest. It's all very technical. It doesn't make sense. Let us go, Shivangla, go a few pages ahead. Impact of the experiences. Let's go ahead to impact of the experiences. It's page 282 in the book. Let's go up.
Up or down?
Go down. 282. Go to this one. Go down. No, you've gone up now. Go one page up. Two pages. One more. But here. Now go into the text.
Okay, 1 second.
Yeah, go down a little more.
Stop the recording.
See, नहीं ये गड़बड़ हो गया.
फिर इसमें नहीं है. Impact of the experience. As seen in Table 3, a majority of the subjects had remarkably positive experiences. What is striking is the use of superlative adjectives in the reports. By no means was this experience ordinary, and in 60% of the sample was life changing. Even those who experienced the OBE as extremely frightening or giving sensations of great power on a chit test of association were not significantly related to mean scores on the hysteroid and psychoticism scales, suggesting that the experience itself neither occurred in particularly sick people nor had a pathological impact. 85% termed it a very pleasant experience. Tests revealed, as would be expected, that those who were in a state of mental calmness at the time of the OBE experienced more positive moods both during and after the experience. Mood states such as joy, freedom, calm, peace, and quiet were experienced much more frequently than in those who had feelings of fear during the experience. 7-inch test comparisons also revealed the fact that those who were mentally calm had more detailed and vivid experiences than those who experienced fear at the time of the OBE. For example, senses of energy, vibrations, feelings that people not out of the body were aware of their presence. In the mentally calm group, the experience was seen as having a more lasting and dramatic impact on life. For example, it was described as a spiritual or religious experience, an experience of great beauty and lasting benefit, and effected a change towards a belief in survival and death.
So a person who goes into these altered states, and one of these altered states is an OOB, there is definitely a release of the fear of death, and it feels like a transcendental and a spiritual experience. And this is something that we have been seeing over and over again, that once we experience these states, the fear of death definitely comes down. Most participants who attend the Gateway Voyage absolutely voice this thing. And most of the excursion participants also to a very large extent.
The data is quite reminiscent of the categories used to describe peak and plateau experiences and mystical religious experiences. For example, the sense of unity, transcendence of time and space, sense of objectivity and reality, a noetic and sacred quality, a deep positive mood state, and a quality of ineffability.
So in the Gita, they talk about going into a state of self-realization. So when a person goes into oneness, transcends time and space, senses reality as all one, right? Has a highly positive kind of an attitude, an uplifting kind of an attitude, and a quality where everything can be done and everything is okay, is that kind of a state of consciousness. Where a person operates in that state of consciousness all the time, you start becoming a self-realized person. And what the OOB experience does, it shifts you into that kind of a state of being and mind.
Sub- Subjects who described a sense of purpose to the experience in general indicated that the experience enabled them to obtain closure on some of the major existential questions. For instance, to show me everything is possible, to show possibilities of new realities. These accounts reflected a preponderance. 85% of subjects who were dealing with issues associated with major life changes and requiring much introspection, review, and assessment of personal strengths and weaknesses.
So it totally change it totally changes the way that you are looking at life, the way that you're perceiving life, and it puts you onto the right track. Right, again, there's no right and wrong, but it puts you into the track which is what you have really come here for.
Discussion. Even without reviewing the widely recognized defects of the questionnaire approach, this study has a number of added defects, including the fact that many of the experiences are remembered from many years before. Structuring the questionnaire is in a directive way added forced choice features. However, the questions were forced choice to aid in quantifying data, but the sacrifice, of course, is obvious. Although a large number of questions were asked, this approach suffers from a lack of detailed individualized protocols. In an attempt to remedy this defect, extensive psychological testing has been done on a selected sample of 100 of these subjects, a random cross section of whom will be personally interviewed and reported in future studies. The generalizability of the data is aided by the semi-random nature of the study and the anonymity of respondents. The study population is highly representative of the general population at large. Separate research for the profile of adaptation to life scale compared a number of different populations, including college students, transcendental meditators, professionals, and psychiatric patients to arrive at norms for the test. It was found that our OBE group was the norm group representing a broad range of educational age and geographic characteristics, as well as having a good psychological and physical adjustments. The 280 non-respondents to the questionnaire cast some doubt on how generalizable our data is even to the OBE population. However, about 100 of the questionnaires were undeliverable, and there was a 1 year unavoidable time delay between the published interview and the mailing of the questionnaires.
So basically, what he's saying is that anyone and everyone can have an out of body experience.
As one reviews our results as an attempt to delineate the phenomenology of the OBE, this study adds a number of major features to the understanding of the experience. An old theosophical tract used the concept of thought form in the general case. The OBE is a typical thought form. The question really being, what form does this thinking take? We have elected not to address the issue of whether mind really separates from the physical body, but our research has raised in our minds fundamental questions about the nature of what is really real. In addition to the sense of separation of mind from body, what becomes apparent from the survey is that total mind, perhaps best referred to as sense of whole self, is separated. There is visually no self-awareness in the body. The whole self, including observing and experiencing ego functions, is located at a point in perceptual space other than the brain, with the physical body being seen as inert and thoughtless.
Okay, 1 second here. So over here he says, fundamental question of what is really real. Okay, so this is again the question when we look at Vedanta also the same thing is happening, ki everything is Maya, right? So he's clearly questioning this over here. Then the sense of whole self is separated. There is visually no self-awareness in the body. So the body, there is no awareness of the body. We've gone out of the body, right? The whole self, including observing and experiencing ego function, is located at a point in perceptual space rather than in the brain. So the cognitive function is not located in the brain itself, it is located somewhere else. And then when we look at the holographic universe concept, right, that the perception is available everywhere because we are actually holographic beings. There's a book called The Holographic Universe. That's also very interesting. Maybe we'll take it up for reading one time. Let's see.
There is no clouding of consciousness as is reported in hypnagogic and hypnopompic and dream, including lucid dream states. In fact, consciousness is felt to be quite clear. A most striking finding reported by subjects is the absolute certainty that they were not dreaming, whether or not the experience occurred when quite aroused. For example, when in severe pain, or, as in the majority of cases, in a resting state. Those who are fearful, frightened, or in pain, when they have this experience, tend to have a much more negative reaction to it and, as might be expected, utilize it for much less extensive attitudinal change, and the experience remains less vivid in the memory. Future studies will further differentiate the latter group, which might be experiences of depersonalization far from being primarily attributes of illness, painful, or toxic states. The majority of these experiences occur often when the person is least expecting them and when quite relaxed. Theories such as those of Palmer emphasize the importance of reduction in proprioceptive input in the physically relaxed state akin to sensory deprivation. As the brain receives less proprioceptive and other sensory input, the ego theoretically becomes able to relax reality testing.
Okay, perfect. So what he's saying over here is if sensory perception is not fed to the ego, then the ego relaxes. So in a sensory deprivation state of consciousness, the disassociation and the breakup, because the ego has no control, there's no sensory perception coming in. So it becomes easy to go into an out of body state. Over here, he also says there's no clouding of consciousness as reported in the hypnogonic or the hypnoponic state. Now, the hypnogonic and the hypnoponic state is the state of what is called is that when you're just getting up from sleep or when you're just getting into sleep. These are states where your beta is available. That means you're still consciously aware, but the theta and the delta states are also becoming available to you. So it's like a matching, and alpha is there. We call the alpha bridge. So that's where a lot of discussion between the conscious mind and the deeper states of consciousness take place. And then, of course, he said the dream state and the lucid dream state, which don't have that much of clarity when we are looking at it from the perspective of OBE states, or the clarity of perceptions which are there.
Regressive components of the OBE seem to occur in the 22% of patients who are reminded of childhood experiences. Thus, it is tempting to invoke the psychoanalytic concept of regression in the service of the ego. But the question remains, what is the service, both from a defensive as well as an adaptive synthetic viewpoint? There is no need to find a single cause for OBEs. Multi-determinism is a widely accepted concept in psychiatry. Thus, our approach to the etiology of OBE is to consider there to be contributions from different levels of explanation.
So OBE can happen from various states, for various states, by various states. There is no fixed kind of an agenda.
Each OBE experience might thus be determined by a number of factors: psychopathological, toxic, organic, evolutionary, developmental, and perceptual, cognitive, each making a contribution. The same individual would likely have a different etiological combination under different circumstances, and the experience would have a different impact. This concept is elaborated in a paper we have in preparation.
So if a person is relaxed, generally the person will have a good experience. If the person is operating out of fear or negativity or depleting thoughts or emotions, they are going to have a depleting emotion. The connection with the OB will be less. The changes or the positive changes that it creates in a person's lifestyle, in their process of thinking, etc., will be diminished. Okay, so this is what he's saying. So every impact of an OBE will be different for different people.
In the Republic, Plato delineates four levels of experiential reality, imaginary, physical, conceptual, and direct transcendental cognition, which he calls direct seeing or the good. In the story of E.R. Republic 1660, the story is told of a valiant man, who died in battle and who later revived and told a story whereby his soul had departed from him. Plato claims something utterly alien to the modern mentality. He says that only after death, when we are free of bodily influence, shall we know the whole crux of being. Plato feels that freeing the psyche from the body is an essential condition for the philosophic journey to ultimate wisdom. As indicated by Grosso, monistic materialism has collapsed the architecture of being to a one level affair, the really real world of sense experience. The Middle Kingdom, the unreal domain of dreams, the flimsiest form of epiphenomena, perhaps the collective asylum of artists and the mad, may teach us to be less dogmatic in the way we toss about epithets like real. It may help us to open up to more multi level ontologies.
So, what is real and what is not real? What is real to someone may be totally unreal to another person. And over here, what he's saying is Plato said that till we actually get out of this physical body, we really do not know what is real because we are stuck in this state of being and this state of consciousness. So, we are really blessed that, we have these tools and technologies which can allow us to experience these expanded states of consciousness so easily, so simply, and so safely, resulting in various changes in the way that we are really looking at life and the way that we are going about it. I think we can stop here.